So, you know that feeling that when you're with your friends and you all agree to do something together that you normally wouldn't do by yourself? Yeah, so that was me at 15 getting talked into riding front row of a roller coaster that does a 90-degree drop at 205 feet going 75 miles per hour. So we strap in. We buckle, the bar's coming down, they lock in, they're feeling pretty sturdy, and the attendants come by and they're doing their checks on our bars just to make sure that they're secure. We're trusting the process, we're doing everything right, we're listening to the instructions that we're being told, and we're being obedient little children. And then the green light goes, and we're off, and we begin our slow climb to the top. And on our way up, my friends and I were making jokes. We're checking out the view. You know, I think I see my mom chaperoning off in the distance. She has absolutely no idea that her son is on this roller coaster. And we finally get to the top after the last few slow clicks. You know, the And you know, I think I got saved again in that moment. And, you know, again, just for job security reasons, that was a joke. You know, I'm staring at the ground because, again, this is a 90-degree drop, and I am rethinking all of the choices that have led me to this moment, okay? I have the dumbest friends that anyone could ever have, and even after listening to all of the instructions and watching people go before us and obeying all the safety rules and being led out to this precipice, I wasn't having it. And before I could think of anything else, we dropped. It was really fun, and I'll never do it again. So, there's that. You know, we've all kind of felt this feeling, okay? It's this feeling where fear kind of grips you because your choices have led you to a precipice where you feel trapped. And a roller coaster is just a really lighthearted way to talk about that, but it's this feeling of intense doubt that the grass is greener on the other side. It's funny when it's a roller coaster, but maybe not so much when it comes to our walks with God. God, I've followed you. I've been obedient to you. I have stepped out in faith, and I have done what I think you're asking of me. I believe that I am in your will, God. My boss, he asked me to fudge some numbers, but that would be fraud and lying, and I just can't do that. So I live the way that you want me to live, but I'm fired because of it. Okay, so what if, instead of being obedient to God, I just gone along with it? I still have a job, right? I want to raise my children according to your word and your ways, Lord. But my spouse, my mom, my dad, they see things differently. And there's tension in the family. And it's just maybe, what if I did things differently? What if I listened to them instead of listening to you, God? Maybe things would be better. You're in school, and you thought the Lord was leading you to keep pursuing your education. But now your life is on hold while you're stuck writing papers, and your friends are just moving on with their life. They're getting married, they're having kids, they're getting jobs, they're making money, they're going on vacation. And it's just, what if I didn't go this route? And in all of these scenarios, when there is an army of what ifs coming at you, you are filled with fear of being on this precipice with nowhere to go, and you feel trapped. Has my obedience to God really gotten me here? And so that's what I want to talk about this morning. As God's people, how do we respond when obedience to God seems to put us between a rock and a hard place? Or when our obedience to God makes us feel like we are trapped between an army and a sea? How do you respond when obedience to God seems to put you in a trap? You know, first things first, this morning we need to face a hard truth, is that obedience to the Lord can sometimes feel like it leads us straight into a trap. God's way may not look like the easiest way. And his way sometimes just seems like it complicates my life. And it makes me feel like I wouldn't be in this situation if I didn't listen to him. And so we're going to look at that. And then second, we're going to look at how we naturally react when obedience to God seems to put us in a tough spot. And then finally, we'll ask, how should we respond when obedience to God seems to put us in a trap? We'll look at how to respond. So we're going to look at the reality of the situation, our reaction when we're in the situation, and finally, what should be our response. So let's look at the reality of the situation, okay? Reality is obedience can put God's people in what feels like a trap. If you have your Bibles, will you turn with me to Exodus chapter 13? Exodus chapter 13. And we're going to be starting in verse 17. Exodus 13, verse 17. Now when Pharaoh had let the people go, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, even though it was near. For God said the people might change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. Hence, God led the people around by the way of the wilderness to the Red Sea, and the sons of Israel went up in martial array from the land of Egypt. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for he had made the sons of Israel solemnly swear, saying, God will surely take care of you, and you shall carry my bones from here with you. Then they set out from Succoth and camped in Etham on the edge of the wilderness. The Lord was going before them in a pillar of cloud by day to lead them on the way, and a pillar of fire by night to give them light, that they might travel by day and by night. He did not take away the pillar of cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night from before the people. So God has just demonstrated his power in Egypt, where every firstborn in the land was killed unless the household had the blood of a lamb painted on their doorpost. And when the hand of God was displayed during this moment, that's when Pharaoh finally said, okay, enough's enough, Israel, leave, get out. And the Israelites were no longer going to serve the Egyptians, but they've now been freed to serve God. And so Israel packs their bags and they leave, okay? And our text picks up during this mass exodus. The Israelites, they are finally leaving Egypt after having been enslaved for 400 years. And so when Pharaoh lets the people go, God doesn't lead Israel in the most direct route to their destination. As far as the people of Israel are concerned, they've got to get to the land that's been promised to their fathers, the land of milk and honey, the land of Canaan. But the problem is that that's north. God's GPS says, recalculating, get on the highway and go south. It's the long way, but it's God's way. And so the people follow God. The text says in verse 17 that God didn't lead Israel up by the land of the Philistines, okay? That would be up the coast. If you looked at a modern map, you would have Egypt, the Gaza Strip, and Israel all along the Mediterranean coast. And the Philistines, they controlled the coast. And God knew that if Israel saw war, they would turn back and want to go to Egypt. And so the people of Israel, they're off. And God leads them to the wilderness, to the Red Sea. And they take Joseph's bones with them. It fulfills a promise that Joseph made. The sons of Israel swear to him to take his remains out of Egypt. And it's a narrative reminder that shows us that, hey, Israel's not staying in Egypt, but they're heading to the land that God promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And guess who's leading Israel out of Egypt? It's I am. It's Yahweh himself, in a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. The presence of God is leading his people. He's with them. He's for them. He's going to deliver them. And his people are right in line with God. They are doing everything right. And as God's people, that's where we should be. Right in step with God. No matter where he leads, we follow. No matter how hard it is, no matter what the outcome looks like, we are with the Lord, even when that seems backwards and south instead of north. And all that we say and all that we do and the way that we live and treat others and the way that we live our lives, our careers, and the way that we raise our children, we are to be right in step with God, obedient, following him. Even if that means following God starts to feel like it's leading to a dicey situation, we stick with him. Look with me, starting in Exodus 14:1. Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Tell the sons of Israel to turn back and camp before Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, and you shall camp in front of Baal-zephon, opposite it by the sea. For Pharaoh will say of the sons of Israel, they are wandering aimlessly in the land. The wilderness has shut them in. Thus I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will chase after them. And I will be honored through Pharaoh and in all of his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord." And they did so. You know, if I'm Moses, I'm thinking, wait, okay, hold on. Lord, what? You want us to turn back towards Egypt and camp in a place we've already passed, and you're going to have the Egyptian army come after us? Okay, again, if I'm Moses, I'm thinking, all right, well, Lord, okay, that's a plan. I don't know if that's be my plan, but that's a plan. But Moses isn't me. The text says in verse 4 of chapter 14, "And they did so." Israel's obedient to God. They do exactly what he says. And that's how it should be. God's people are obedient to the Lord. But sometimes that obedience can lead to what feels like a trap. Look with me in verse 5. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his servants had a change of heart toward the people, and they said, "What is this we've done, that we have let Israel go from serving us?" So he made his chariot ready and took his people with him. And he took 600 select chariots and all the other chariots of Egypt with officers over all of them. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he chased after the sons of Israel as the sons of Israel were going out boldly. Then the Egyptians chased after them with all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, his horsemen and his army, and they overtook them camping by the sea besides Pi-hahiroth in front of Baal-zephon. So the king of Egypt has a change of heart, just like the Lord said would happen. And Pharaoh gathers his army, and he chases after the Israelites. And the Egyptians catch up to where Israel's now camping by the sea, where they doubled back to. And so now you have the Egyptian army, you have Israel, and you have the Red Sea. And obedience to God has put his people in what seems like a trap. How is Israel going to get out of this? They did everything the Lord said. They followed him. They obeyed when he said to double back. They listened to him where he said to make camp. And now they are trapped between the wrath of the Egyptians and the calamity of the sea. Obedience to God has led his people into a trap. Israel's obedience to the Lord has put them in a seemingly no-win situation that is completely out of their control. And this isn't the only time in Scripture we see this pattern. I mean, the Bible has a few examples where obedience to God seems like it puts his people in a trap. For example, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They refused to bow to the king's idol, fully aware that it could mean death. And where does their obedience lead them? They get thrown into a fiery furnace. Obedience, trap. Daniel refuses to pray to anyone but God. And where does his obedience lead him? He's thrown into a lion's den. Obedience, trap. Joseph refuses to sleep with Potiphar's wife. Joseph is faithful in his obedience to God, and he doesn't want to sacrifice that. And where does Joseph's obedience lead him? He's thrown in jail. Obedience, trap. The Israelites, they follow God out of Egypt, and where does he put them? between an Egyptian army and a sea with no way out. Where has their obedience led them? It's led them into what seems like a trap. God's trying to teach his people something. Why is this happening? Why is this story recorded and written? Well, eventually, when the Israelites entered the land that God had promised them, they were going to find themselves in very similar situations. Okay, there's going to be giant fortified cities. There's going to be armies that are 10 times their size. There's going to be battles that they're going to have to fight with candles and jars. And they will find themselves in situations over and over and over again where their obedience to God puts them in a situation that seems like a trap. And the same is for us, the same is true of us today. I mean, oftentimes, obedience to God can lead you to a place that feels like a trap, like there's no way out. Like again, when you're at work and you're asked to do something unethical or illegal, and obedience to God would tell you no. But refusal to do that would lead you to a loss of a job, a loss of income. You know, in our lives, sometimes, right now, those situations may seem really, really small. But we have brothers and sisters all the way around the world where their life is on the line and it matters, where they are caught between an army and a sea because of their faithful obedience to God. And if we can't obey in these small situations, how are we going to obey when the big ones hit? The point is obedience to God can put God's people in what feels like a trap. And when that occurs, when we are on the precipice and the what ifs and the doubts start to creep in, what can happen is that our fear of the trap can make us question the Lord's plan. Our fear of the trap can make us question the Lord's plan. When things aren't working out the way that we expect, or when our obedience to God puts us in a situation that feels like he's wronged us, the fear of the situation that we are in, it has the tendency to blind our eyes and make us question God. Look with me in verse 10. As Pharaoh drew near, the sons of Israel looked, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them. And they became very frightened, so the sons of Israel cried out to the Lord. Then they said to Moses, "Is it because there were no graves in Egypt that you've taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you dealt with us this way, bringing us out of Egypt? Is this not the word that we spoke to you in Egypt, saying, 'Leave us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians'? For it would have been better to have served the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." The Israelites are trapped again between the Egyptian army and the sea. Fear engulfs them, and they cry out to God in verse 10. But they're crying out to God, it's not a good thing, okay? They're terrified, and they're crying out to the Lord. And in our English translations, that makes us think, oh, you know what? Hey, good for them. They remember God. But in the flow of this narrative, that's not what happens. We need to remember that Moses is God's representative. So in verses 11 and 12, we see what they're crying out really is. Them complaining to Moses is them questioning God. I mean, just a few minutes ago, we sang, "Lord, I need you." This isn't that. This is, "Lord, how could you?" Israel's fear of the Egyptians and being trapped between them and the sea and their upcoming deaths is making Israel question God. Fear has them. Their fear of the trap consumes them. And they are standing at the precipice of this moment where the grass is looking greener on the other side, where there are no graves in Egypt that you've taken us here to die. It would be better to be slaves than to die out here in the wilderness. We trusted you, God, and you led us to what? This? You were supposed to free us, but now we're going to die. Our fear of the trap can make us question the Lord's plan. Doesn't just the same thing happen to us? I mean, this is not an ancient Israel problem. This is a human problem. When we feel trapped, we don't just question our circumstances. We start questioning God himself. Why should I remain faithful to God when he's led me here? I trusted you. I followed you. I have obeyed you. And what, you've led me to this? This isn't fair. Why do I have to lose my job? Why aren't my kids talking to me? Why is my family falling apart? Why aren't they suffering as bad as me? How come it feels like you've detoured my life? We're just like the Israelites. Our fear of the trap can make us question God's plan. But when God is at the helm of the ship, when we are walking in faithful obedience to the Lord, fear of the situation is not the response that we should have. The fear that we might feel in the trap and on this precipice due to all these what ifs and how could yous, it has the tendency to turn our eyes away from the one who's still faithfully there and from the one who is still in complete control. There may be an army and a sea, but there's still God. When our obedience to God puts us in a situation that feels like a trap, don't fear the trap. Fear God and watch him work for his glory. Fear God and watch him work for his glory. Look with me in verse 13. But Moses said to the people, "Do not fear. Stand by and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you have seen today, you will never see them again forever. The Lord will fight for you while you keep silent." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the sons of Israel to go forward. As for you, lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it. And the sons of Israel shall go through the midst of the sea on dry land. As for me, behold, I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, so they will go in after them. And I will be honored through Pharaoh and all of his army, through his chariots and his horsemen. Then the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I am honored through Pharaoh, through his chariots and his horsemen." The angel of God, who had been going before the camp of Israel, moved and went behind them. And the pillar of cloud moved from before them and stood behind them. So it came between the camp of Egypt and the camp of Israel, where there was a cloud along with the darkness, yet it gave light at night. Thus the one did not come near the other all night. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord swept back the sea by a strong east wind all night, and turned the sea into dry land, so the waters were divided. The sons of Israel went through the midst of the sea on dry land, and the waters were like a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. Then the Egyptians took up the pursuit, and all of Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen went in after them into the midst of the sea. At the morning watch, the Lord looked down on the army of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and cloud, and brought the army of the Egyptians into confusion. He caused their chariot wheels to swerve, and he made them drive with difficulty. So the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from Israel, for the Lord is fighting for them against the Egyptians." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea so that the waters may come back over the Egyptians, over their chariots and their horsemen." So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal state at daybreak, while the Egyptians were fleeing right into it. Then the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen, even Pharaoh's entire army that had gone into the sea after them. Not even one of them remained. But the sons of Israel walked on dry land through the midst of the sea, and the waters were like a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. When Israel saw the great power which the Lord had used against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. When our obedience to God puts us in what it feels like a trap, don't fear the trap. Fear God and watch him work for his glory. The Israelites, they are terrified as what's about to happen. To them, the Egyptians are about to capture and kill them. But what happens next is probably one of the coolest scenes in Scripture. I mean, again, if this were a movie, it would be perfect cinema. Okay? Israel, they're camped in front of the Red Sea. And so you have the Red Sea, you have God in a pillar of cloud and fire, you have the Israelite encampment, and you have the Egyptian army. And in Israel, they are trapped between the Egyptian army and the sea. And God is going to act. Israel's obedience has not led them into a trap. God has not trapped his people. This is all part of the plan. God is at work for his glory. And so Moses steps out and he delivers his Oscar-winning line. He says, "Do not fear. Stand by and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians that you've seen, you'll never see them again forever. The Lord will fight for you while you keep silent." Don't fear Pharaoh. Don't fear the sea. Fear the one who holds both in his hands. Everything's going according to plan, and Yahweh is at work. Israel has no need to fear the trap that they find themselves in. God fights for his people. So God's presence in the pillar of cloud and fire moves from the front of the Israelite encampment and to the back to act as a protective barrier between them and the Egyptians. And that's when Moses raises his staff and he stretches his hand out over the sea, and the Lord sweeps back the sea. And the Israelites walk across on dry land with water being held like walls on either side of them. The text tells us in verse 20 that the Egyptians never came close to the Israelites all night while this happened, because God separated them and he was shielding his people. And so when morning comes, the Egyptians get pursuit. The Egyptian army starts to cross the sea, but the Lord looks down from his position of sovereignty and confuses the Egyptians. I mean, God makes their chariots swerve and drive with difficulty. You have the most advanced weapon of warfare at the time and used by the Egyptians, and God just goes, boop. The might of Egypt, it's reduced to nothing. I mean, you have the pinnacle of human power. It's undone by the God who just simply wills it. And so the Egyptians realize that their military technology is useless, that they're nothing. Verse 25, it tells us that they realize who's fighting for Israel. They recognize that Yahweh is fighting for his people, and Yahweh's at work. God tells Moses, "Put your hand back over the sea." The waters come back in, and they remain as they were. And none of the Egyptians that were caught in the sea remain alive. Verse 30 tells us that the Israelites saw the bodies of the Egyptian float up to the top of the water and to the seashore. And in all of this, verse 31, when Israel saw the great power which the Lord used against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord, and they believed in him and in his servant Moses. How do you respond when obedience to God seems like it puts you in a trap? You fear God, and you watch him work for his glory. Because when you do that, you're going to see what Israel saw. That the trap, it's never a trap. It was the stage for God's glory and his power to be revealed. So I want to take a second real quick, and I want to talk about what fearing God means, okay? Proverbs 9:10 says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. In the Bible, the word that's translated fear can mean several things. It can refer to terror that one feels in the sight of a certain situation. It can mean respect in the way that a servant fears his master and serves him. Fear can also mean awe or reverence that a person feels in the presence of greatness. And the fear of the Lord, it's a little bit of a combination of all of these. It's the recognition that there's someone bigger, badder, stronger, and more powerful than you. There's God, and then there's you. There's nothing that can stop him. And there's nothing that can compare to him. He's powerful. He's dangerous. He controls the wind and the waves. He raises his voice and the earth melts. He breaks the bow and he cuts the spear and he burns chariots with fire. That's God. And fearing God isn't just about trembling. It's about standing in awe of the one who holds everything in his hands. It's knowing that the God who fights for you is also the God and the one who could undo the entire world with just a word. And so the fear of the Lord is the recognition of who is like Yahweh. That's why the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. That's why knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. There's nothing like God, and he's over all. Fearing God doesn't mean being afraid of him in the way that we fear a problem. It means recognizing his power, who he is, and trusting him more than our circumstances. Israel had just seen firsthand what it means to fear the Lord. They had no question, or they had no answer to the question, who is like Yahweh? Because there's no one like him. They think they're trapped, and their fear of the Egyptians and the sea is pressing in against them and overwhelming them. But their fear should have never been in what felt like a trap. Their fear should have been in the Lord, who is mightier and in control of all their circumstances. The problem wasn't Israel's position. The problem was their perspective. Their eyes should have been on God. Their obedience to him did not lead them to a precipice of danger. Their obedience led them to exactly where God wants them because he's in control. How often do we let our fear of circumstances be bigger than our fear of the Lord? How often do we see the walls closing in around us and forget that God is still in control? When you are in God's will and you're being obedient to him and following him, when you find yourself in a situation that feels like a trap, don't fear the trap, but fear God. Fear the one who is mightier than your circumstances. Your obedience to him might lead you in a situation that feels like a trap, but it's not because he's malicious and cruel and ensnaring. It's because God is at work for his glory. God is at work for his glory. God is leading his people out of Egypt to free them from slavery, okay? Completely true. But their freedom isn't just for freedom's sake. It's for his name's sake. This isn't just about Israel's rescue. This is about Yahweh's renown. God's doing all of this, and he's doing it his way so that he receives the glory. 3 times in our text, God says, I'm going to do this so that I will receive glory. Verses 4, 17, and 18. God gaining glory is the revelation and knowledge of Yahweh and his greatness and his sovereignty by his power. God isn't just rescuing his people. He's revealing himself to Israel, to Egypt, and to the entire world. There's nothing like him. He's above it all. I mean, does God already have glory? Yeah, absolutely. But now God's going to make sure that he's recognized for it and for who he is. I mean, the God of Egypt, Pharaoh, the God of gods, the self-proclaimed God-like representative on earth, no. Pharaoh thought he was a god. Egypt thought he was unstoppable. The world feared his chariots, and Yahweh laughed. God's not reacting to Pharaoh. He's ruling over Pharaoh. This is not a back and forth struggle. This is Yahweh proving once and for all who he truly is And he's the God who reigns. Yahweh hardens his heart. Yahweh influences control over him. And in a final defeat of the Egyptians, Yahweh declares, I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that when they go in after them, I will gain glory through all of Pharaoh and all his army, and his chariots and his horsemen. Who's like Yahweh? No one. God puts Israel in a situation where they cannot win. They see no way out, and then God says, now watch. The only person who gets glorified here is God. And Israel will have to learn that God is going to put them in situations where he can only win and where he can only be glorified. They get no claim in this. Israel doesn't have to fight. Israel doesn't have to strategize. Israel doesn't save itself. Yahweh alone wins the battle. All glory be to God. God alone is glorified. You know, that's the incredible thing about the Lord. I mean, he redeems, he delivers, and he does it in a way that both teaches his people to trust him and glorifies himself. And isn't that just like our God? Yeah, our obedience can lead us to places that may seem like a trap, but the Lord's at work. You know, the Christian life, we're not promised comfort. Nowhere in Scripture does it say, follow me and I'll make your life easy. Obedience can lead to some pretty uncomfortable places. I mean, it may put you between an army and a sea. It may result in the loss of a job. It may result in a broken relationship. It may feel like everything is on hold. But God has a plan. And his plans and his ways do not always involve our comfort. But his plans and his ways will always result in his glory. And God will sometimes put us in situations and position us so that when deliverance comes, we can only give glory to him. It's the only thing we can do. So when obedience to God puts you in a situation that seems like a trap, don't fear the trap. Fear God and watch him work for his glory. Where's God calling you? Where obedience feels like a trap. What would it look like for you to trust him in that space today? We are not a people who fear the circumstances around us, but we are a people who stand firm in the fear of the Lord, trusting that he is sovereign over it all. And provision may not look like deliverance in the moment, but for believers, that provision is resurrection in the days to come. And that's our ultimate hope. Not just a temporary rescue, but eternal redemption. God directs our lives for his maximal glory. The Lord will fight for you. You just need to be still. Fear God and watch him work for his glory.